And we're live. Hello, Tolkien geeks, and welcome back to Voice of Geekdom Live. My name's Dan, and my guest today is a good friend of mine, Carole. Carole and I have been on panels together in the past on other channels and so on, and we've known each other a little while now. I think I first was sort of familiar with you from your very early appearances on Helen's channel, good mutual friend of both of us, and so that was
That's
where I
true.
was first aware of you, because I was a fan, and then we became friends through that, really. And I met lots and lots of other people through that too, and you're one of those people. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. First debut on the channel. I hope you'll come back in the future already, but we'll see how this goes tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
Tell people who you are and what you do and what you're all about, and just maybe tell people a little bit about your kind of background with Tolkien and stuff.
Sure. Hi, my name is Carole. I have been affiliated with a couple of channels. Most recently, Smokescreen Vids. He's a real big Game of Thrones fan and some other things, but I have been slowly pulling him over into Middle Earth because dragons are awesome, and yeah. But I've also
because I need more competition.
No, he's still kind of on the fence of it, but I just want him to kind of embrace, the whole aspect of it. There's more than just Game of Thrones, that type of thing. Not so much competition.
Yeah, I'm kidding, of course.
The other thing is that I actually got a chance to with Helen, who is awesome, and with a couple of other people. We did the Con of Thrones. We, of all things, at a Con of Thrones, we did a Tolkien panel in which we were trying to, compare and contrast some of the cool aspects of Tolkien, and also with J.R.R. Martin, because he's very much influenced by Tolkien. And we were going through some of the aspects of the betwixt and betweens. And apparently I became well known because I got asked a question, who's my favorite character? And I said Smaug. And I stand by that. And come at me if you want, but Smaug is awesome.
No, he is. It's a very good answer.
And apparently, I guess people were like, the dragon? I'm like, the dragon is awesome. Come on, Smaug is the man. He sat there and takes no crap. He said, I want that. I'm taking that. And if you get in my way, I will breathe fire upon you. I'm like, I kind of like that. Very to the point. He's a little crazy, but we can go with that. So yeah, I'm very much a Tolkien fan, very much a science fiction, fantasy girl from way back. Done a lot of Con of Thrones, a few channels on YouTube, and I'm getting finally to go to Comic-Con in July, which has been canceled for the last couple of years. So I'm hoping to get a little inside information on what's happening with the Tolkien stuff that maybe might be there at the channel. So if I find out, stay tuned.
Right. I'm going to a little Tolkien event myself next month in your town.
Yes, you are.
Very much hoping to see you there at some point. Not probably not at the conference, but unless you're going to get a ticket in the next week. But
I need to look at that. I need to look into that. You may see me there.
But yeah, that's going to be fun. I can't wait to see you. And meeting lots of a few other people in the chat. I said this last week as well. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be my first time in the States as well. So
oh, nice.
Yeah, very much looking forward to it. I just want to say hello to some of the people in the chat before we get any further. Mark Sheeser has got a quote from the Dwarves and the Hobbit there. Blunt that Ives bent the forks. I mean, I get the forks, and tell us where the dragon steak is. I see Crafty Spirit, long-time fan of the channel. Alison's one of my patrons. Nice to see you. We've got some of her questions coming up in a little while. She's got work off today, which is awesome. Yay for no work. My friend Danny. Hi, Danny. We've got a super chat already from Mr. Plixiplox. Actually, I shouldn't say Mr. I have no idea of your gender, but it's good to see you, Plixie. $5, thank you kindly. He says, hi, Dan. He or she, they, says, hi, Dan. Really glad to meet Carole on your channel. I hope your future success does not lead to any sort of dragon sickness. Well, I wouldn't mind if it did, to be honest. I like gold. Haha, cheers. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. We see Erin, another one of my patrons, another friend of mine as well. I'll also see her at some point down in Virginia. I think she's also going to be in DC at some point, so perhaps we'll see her as well. Kate is also going to be there too. It's good to see her. And we've got, who's this? You've got Carol in the chat. And it's Mark again. So yeah, thanks all for coming out. That's good to see everybody again. And yeah, we've got a fun topic today. The dragons are one of the most interesting kind of species or races or monsters that are in the Middle Earth Legendarium. Really, I'm just going to run through us a little bit of an intro of kind of like a shorthand history of the dragons here to get us going, and then we'll get into some Patreon questions. So the dragons first appeared in the first age of Middle Earth, and they were devised by Morgoth, the first original Dark Lord. He created the dragons in the first age shortly after the Noldor first arrived back in Middle Earth as a response to their skill and ferocity in battle. That was after the Dagor Raglareb, the glorious battle, shortly after Fingolfin whipped his butt. And so the first dragon created was a legendary dragon called Glaurung, who was particularly nasty creature who did some really bad stuff. Like similarly awesome to Smaug in some ways, but just arguably like worse in like more sadistic ways.
Yeah.
So Glaurung was a flightless, fire-breathing dragon. The first dragons didn't have wings yet. We've got a question about this a little bit later on about winged dragons and were they similar to eagles and so on. So we'll get to that later. Glaurung, he had other powers as well, though. He had kind of like an ability to hypnotize people, and that plays quite a prominent role in the story of the Children of Húrin. In the Children of Húrin, reference is made to the evil spirit within him. So I wonder whether that's part of the spirit of Morgoth that went into him in the beginning, like possibly. And it's not really stated exactly what that means, but it's probably better to leave that kind of ambiguous. But he is eventually defeated by Turin-Turambar at great personal cost to him. I don't need to tell that whole story, and I think probably people know that. And then later on, dragons appear in the Fall of Gondolin storyline. So that's the next real major appearance of dragons. Morgoth's armies show up and sack the city there. And it's said that, this is a quote from the Silmarillion, "At last, in the year when Eärendil was 7 years old, Morgoth was ready, and he loosed upon Gondolin his Balrogs and his orcs and his wolves, and with them came dragons of the brood of Glaurung, and they were become now many and terrible." So these were Glaurung's kids, basically showing up, and they were many and terrible, which just sounds terrifying. And then at the end of the first age, in the War of Wrath, dragons play a role again, and this is the first winged dragons. So Morgoth perfected his design at this point. I like to think of Angband as having this. I've said this before. I've made this joke before, but having this kind of like evil R&D department.
It's like a little factory floor of just nastiness. Just like, oh, let's put that on there.
Yeah, Sauron is this like chief scientist cooking up like evil ways to create like nastier and nastier monsters. It's just an interesting image and thought. So that was the War of Wrath. The largest dragon in history fought in the War of Wrath, which was Ancalagon the Black, whom we don't really have too many like stories about him. He's just, he's mentioned in the Silmarillion, and he's massive. And he's defeated by Eärendil, who's fully grown by this point, and he shows up in his flying ship Vingalot. And the fall of Ancalagon shattered Thangorodrim and broke Beleriand itself. So the landmass itself was shattered, and most of Angband is underground. So it's like an underworld. It's like hell, basically. And so it all collapsed in, and the entire continent ended up under the water. And then, so in the Second Age, there's not much to say about dragons. Obviously, there's lots of dragons at the end of the First Age. Lots of them die. Presumably, quite a few of them survived, because we know that lots of them show up later on again. But they flee into the north, and that's when they show up again in the Third Age. There's another named dragon in the Third Age around the year 2000 called Scatha the Worm, who was defeated by Thram of the Eotheod, which were the ancestors of the Rohirrim. So they were the Northmen around Ravanion, that area, before they went south and were granted the land of Rohan. And he was defeated by Thram. And after the defeat of Scatha, the horde of the worm was fought over by the dwarves and the Northmen. So they kind of like had this beef, because a lot of the gold was originally belongs to the dwarves, but it was the men who defeated the dragons, so they had a claim to it, rather like the events of the last few chapters of The Hobbit, really. And so that happened. Actually, one point about that as well: the horn that Eowyn gives to Merry Brandybuck at the end of the Lord of the Rings came from that horde. So that's where that reference comes from. With that. That was the war horn that he brings back to the Shire and uses to raise the troops in the Scouring of the Shire chapters. And then, so we've got one other mention of another instance with dragons in the Third Age. We've got Dain the First, and we've got a question about this too. And so he was killed. Basically, the dwarves of Durin's folk fled Moria after the Balrog came. And most of them went to Erebor, and some of them went up to the Grey Mountains in the north. And beyond the Grey Mountains was the Forad Waith, the Great Northern Waste, which is icy wasteland. And so the dragons came down from there and attacked the dwarves, and he was killed there by a cold drake. And then finally we get to Smaug, your favourite. And so Smaug came down to Erebor, attacked the dwarves, took their treasure, killed a whole bunch of them. And Thror, king under the mountain, and his son Thrain escaped through a secret passage. And then we get to the events of The Hobbit. So Smaug was eventually killed by Bard the Bowman, which I think people probably know that one. So we won't retell that one either. But yeah, that's our brief overview of dragons. I don't think I've missed too many big things. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The only thing I was thinking is that, and I'm sure we'll get into it because it's on some of the questions, and I was in the research that I was doing is, what was Morgoth's, well, the whole conversation is that, were dragons a product of Morgoth's creation, or were they a Maiar that kind of went in a different direction? Are they the end results of the magic that he did? But I've always been fascinated with the fact that they make nothing, they take everything. And however, they're very much, attracted to pretty shiny things, and they're very grumpy. So Glaurung was probably be the nastiest. I think Smaug is the most, flirtatious, but still equally grumpy, but not as vicious. Glaurung was just like, I'm here to party, I'm here to war, I'm here to tear everything up. So it's interesting how all of the dragons seem to have some degree of this behavior, but I've always wondered, is it because maybe sort of like with and Helen's nowhere near around when we talk about our dear friend with the Cimmerals, by creating something, some of yourself goes into it. So you're to your point of, is there a bit of the dissatisfaction and the jealousy and the wanting that was in Morgoth that went into his dragons, or were the dragons just byproducts of all of that magic that was going on?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both, isn't it? There certainly was some sorcery that went into their creation, you would think. I think also there was probably selective breeding that happened with the dragons. Like they must have had to have been bred from other reptiles and things like this, I think. And maybe that's why we see there's like a lessening of the dragon kind over time as well, where their blood was maybe diluted over time. this as well with the orcs, and there's quite a lot in common with the orcs and the dragons. It's a similar question of where did they come from, and there isn't necessarily an answer to that one either. You know, there's the answer that the Silmarillion gives, but Tolkien himself wasn't necessarily sure about that, and that was just a version that Christopher went with. You know, we get that line in the movies that Christopher Lee gives, who Saruman gives about they were elves once.
They were elves once.
But
and goblin men.
Tolkien had various ideas about the orcs, and I think the dragons are similar, except he was wise enough to not really think about it too much and overthink it. But you've got the same problem there, because there was a kind of a theological line that he didn't want to cross, where the forces of evil cannot create, they can only. That quote that's been posted all over the internet for the last several months after the Rings of Power trailer, essentially. Evil cannot create anything new, it can only mock. And you know, Frodo says something to that effect in The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
So that was important to him. And so that I don't think that they were new lives that he created. But then what were they? Were they automatons? Because they certainly don't seem like they seem like they have agency and self-awareness to me.
They're highly intelligent, and he may have, because like with Glaurung was purposely, even the early dragons were built and were created or crafted, whatever you want to call it, because he wanted a ultimate war machine. He wanted, you know, I want the big battle bad. I want to, you know, this when anyone sees it, that's it, we've lost, you know, I've got the biggest thing. But it's interesting how each of them was killed in their own way by that which, you know, Morgoth never thought would happen. I thought I've you know, allowed for all of this, but it's like, nope, you had a blind spot, and that blind spot went into your dragons, and that's what was used to basically take them all down. But it's interesting because they are extremely intelligent. So are they automatons? No, I don't think so. Or like anything else, you know, that gets, you know, corrupted. You thought that dog was in the yard, but now that dog's out of the yard, and he's like, hey, I kind of like it out here. I don't think I'm going to listen to you anymore. And I'm just going to go off and do my own thing. Because I thought it was always interesting that those dragons, wherein they made, what was the line in The Hobbit, when they were saying, we don't want the you know, the Dark One to get to the dragons, because if that happens, if that dragon under the mountain decides to partner up, we're all going to have a bad day, because they remembered Glaurung. I mean, centuries later, they're like, no, we don't, millennia later, we do not want to have this conversation. If Smaug decides, hey, for kicks and giggles, let's partner up with Sauron and see what kind of other kind of, you know, mayhem and craziness that we can get into. So they have intelligence, but there's enough of that corruption in them that it works against them in the end. But man, they're just entertaining in the worst possible way.
They certainly are. Yeah, they're amongst dragons in fantasy, high fantasy fiction. I think Tolkien's dragons are amongst the most intelligent and interesting, because they have plots, but they're also very simple as well. You know, they have like kind of like their primary drive, their kind of is give me treasure, let me sleep on it. I love to sleep, and give me more shiny things. And
if you come in here and touch my shiny things, I will consume you. So go over there. Mine. I know it was yours, but mine now. Off with you.
One thing that I didn't mention in my little history there, actually, which it just occurred to me, was that 4 of the dwarven rings were consumed by the dragons as well, which is intriguing. And they didn't keep them for themselves; they just ate them, or, you know, I think maybe consumed means that they burnt them. We are told that dragon fire can burn the rings of power. It's not strong enough to burn the one ring, but it can melt the rings of power. So it's a pretty cool little fact.
I'm wondering if somehow the dragons, when they were crafted, were did that involve volcanic activity? Because you've got something that can breathe fire. How do you have fire, you know, given life? Because it is the ultimate aspect of it. I can deliver basically liquid napalm and then ignite it, and then nothing is left, or very little bit is left. But it's interesting, that aspect of the fire, as to what he wanted to do, because effectively between water washing everything away, fire is this great transformational element.
Mm.
Because it can consume everything, but it can also, release a few things as well. So it's interesting that he chose those particular elements, and the 4 rings were consumed. But I wonder if Dragonfire, is it known that Dragonfire couldn't consume the 1 ring?
I'm pretty sure it's said in somewhere. It's certainly said in chapter 2 of the Lord of the Rings. Excuse me. Gandalf says it can only be destroyed in the fire of Mount Doom, where it was made.
Where it was wrought.
Yeah, and by that time there are no dragons left that can breathe fire to be able to melt anything. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a fact. It's stated as fact that the 1 ring can only be unmade where it was made. So, yeah, the fire imagery that's associated with Tolkien's various themes is very interesting, actually. I mean, there's a lot of fire imagery that goes on with Feanor as well, and people like that, and you think about the secret fire as well, and the flame imperishable, and how that's associated with creation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, fire. But then you think Mordor definitely has this association with extremes of temperature and with fire. So there's sort of like an interesting duality to fire, and it's a dangerous, wild thing, but it's interesting to think about sort of thematically, I suppose.
Yeah, and if you think about that, in context of a dragon, this picturing a dragon breathing fire, fire is a beautiful, it has its own life, if you will. It needs oxygen to breathe. It needs fuel to burn, to continue, and it will consume everything around it if it's uncontained. But it can be contained. It can be used for productive purposes, but it's always on that borderline of, if you lose track of it, it's going to get away from you, and then it's going to cause all kinds of trouble. Is the definition of a dragon. They're beautiful. You think you've contained it, but once it decides it wants to go over there and do whatever, no, come back here. Yeah, Tolkien's dragons were like, I'm cooperating because I choose to cooperate. Unlike other dragons, which were, they were forms of transportation. They were bonded to just one person. And again, I'm thinking of Tolkien, J.R.R. Martin. I wonder, J.R.R. Martin, I'm wondering if he even maybe did that with his dragons, so it wouldn't be, because definitely that concept of the dragon, bringing it into Game of Thrones, they're these beautiful, wonderful creatures. They sort of kind of know where they come from. They're only bonding to a certain group of people. Somehow they went away, and then mysteriously they've come back. But are they all gone? We don't know until we get the last book. I like one of the comments I was reading about in the research that I did. They were like, okay, all the dragons were gone by the 3rd age. Were they? Because there could have been dragons that were like, I'm not being bothered with all of that. It's sort of like, I'm thinking of the Ents, because the Ents were like, don't be hasty. All the stuff that you all are doing, in the end, we'll still be here when you're done. In the greater scheme of things, how long dragons lived. There have to be those that are like, nah, I'm just going to be up here on this mountain chilling, enjoying the scenery. I'm not going to be dealing with you crazy people. Maybe we all sat up here and looked at this conflict and said, yeah, I'm not trying to die that way. Maybe I'll be over here. You don't bother me. I don't bother you.
There are vast open spaces to the north that the dragons could have hid. We wouldn't have known. So it's a possibility. I don't think we can prove empirically that there were no dragons left after Smaug.
I want to think there are dragons. There will be dragons.
I believe.
I believe there are dragons.
All right. So should we get into some Patreon questions?
Cool.
So before we start, I'll just say, if anybody has any questions in the chat tonight live, obviously super chats are turned on, and we won't necessarily stop everything right away, but we will get to every super chat that comes up. So it's a great way to support the channel, and it's really important for small creators as well. So if anybody feels like chiming in, then we'll be keeping a close eye on that as well. And in the meantime, we'll obviously try and get to as many of your comments as we can as well. But yeah, thank you all for coming out. I've just seen a few more names that popped in my chat window here. Forrest Blatter, Canadian Fantasy Corner is another YouTuber. Home Working Primate, which is a cool name. I saw a chat up here from somebody from Italy as well. So ciao to you. But yeah, without further ado, I think we'll get into Patreon questions. So let me just bring up my sheet here. The first one is from Marco Berry, who this was actually a question that was submitted last week, and I said to Marco that I was actually going to be covering dragons this week, so I said to him, we'll put that off for a week. So he says, "Hi Dan, what are the dragons? Are they sentient? They are sentient, shapeshift, and have some magical properties. Could they be corrupted Maiar? This seems like the closest Morgoth ever came to creating something, as we're never told they are a mockery of another life form." So yeah, we sort of touched on this question a little bit already. The question says they are sentient shapeshift. Do they shapeshift? I don't know that there's any instances of dragons shapeshifting that I'm aware of.
I don't think so. I don't think in none of Tolkien's dragons take other forms unless super grumpy and sleep. I mean, other than that, no. I think they are sentient beings. I think they were created that way. I think unlike orcs that are kind of debated as to where they came from, I don't know that we know how Morgoth was sitting there one day and said, "I need a thing. I'm looking at that fire over there. Hey, here's a lizard and some fire. Let's do that." Other than that, I don't know that we know, but they're definitely sentient. They're extremely intelligent. But that intelligence sometimes works against them because they are an animal. So there's those baser instincts that sometimes overwork the higher intelligence, because again, I'm chasing the shiny thing, or I'm trying to get you from taking my shiny things, and I will get rid of everyone who has the shiny things so I can have shiny things. So I think it's this sentient animal kind of works in my mind.
Sometimes the arrogance of dragons works against them as well. The ego and the kind of we see that with Smaug, certainly with his conversation with Bilbo.
The flattery. Yeah. It's like, and Bilbo knows from all the lore. Talk to him, get him going, get him like, yes, of course, I'm wonderful. Smaug, you magnificent dread, whatever. It's just, let me just live long enough to get where I can hide. But Glaurung was one of those where extremely intelligent, but he was all for the let's wreck shop. But I think they're sentient. I believe that.
So what about the Maiar part then? Because that's another possibility. I see there are a few possibilities for where does the sentience and self-awareness and kind of consciousness of dragons, where does it come from? How do you get around the question of were they created by Morgoth? Yeah, in a way you could argue they are the closest that Morgoth ever came to creating something himself. You could definitely say that. And that is a point towards the theory that they could be Maiar, I would say.
What were Balrogs?
The only thing I would say about that was that Balrogs were Maiar. We know that for a fact. And they were spirits of fire. So they were like Ariel, the spirit who drives the sun every day. They were like a corrupted version of her. I see them as that. And wouldn't you think that the dragons would be more similar to that than what they are, which is giant lizards?
True.
Wouldn't there be some kind of commonality there? I mean, they're both creatures of fire, but they're different. They're certainly a different part of the taxonomy of evil. So
yeah, because Balrogs tend to want to exist with fire, and they are, fire, embodied fire. I mean, the cracks of their skin, ash falling off, the whole 9 yards. Whereas dragons are kind of self-contained, and there's this chamber of which they breathe the fire. But from what I remember, Forgive me, it's been a minute. I don't remember like a dragon sitting on top of a volcano, taking a little bath, going, "Oh yeah, here I am, my little dragoness self. Let me replenish, my stores." No, they want to have a nice warm hole to sit in and count their takings, whereas the Balrogs were, we are this, we are the embodiment of fire and flame, but we're, and this is a controversial comment coming from me. Were Balrogs evil, or were they just you came down here where I wasn't up there where you were? I mean, the dwarves delved too deep, woke me up. Why are you here? Okay, so now we're gonna have a moment. Whereas
you remember what the Balrogs got up to in the first age, right? You remember that part.
A little bit. But if you're doing it is a dragon of Maiar, whereas a Balrog, is, I'm wondering if they are a descendant. Maybe somehow Morgoth partnered with the Balrogs to figure out how to twist a few things, and he came up with a controllable fire source. I don't know.
Balrogs also have an association with shadow as well.
Shadow and death. Yep.
Shadow and flame. Like there's that too, but they are sort of specifically said to be spirits of fire in the Valar Quenta in the Silmarillion, and that's how I've always taken them, is to be like a corrupted version of basically something similar to what Arion was, who was one of the few who wasn't corrupted by Morgoth. I personally, I don't take the view that dragons are Maiar. It doesn't seem to quite fit to me.
Yeah, they definitely seem like he was looking for something. Okay, me doing this by myself is not allowing me to win. Let me get some armament to be able to go forth and destroy and wreak havoc and whatever. And while you're distracted over here comes, I think he thought about that. It seems like every single time Morgoth got an opportunity, he thought about it and he tried to improve upon. But because he couldn't create anything himself, there were problems with it. Hence, they were able to be killed because, if he had created something, I would think he would create it so that it was indestructible. It was pretty close, but, they were able to be killed.
Yeah.
They were just not really controllable. You're not going to put a harness on that and walk that down the street. It's going to do what it's in its best interest to cooperate.
My feeling is that dragons, there's two questions, like where does the physical body of a dragon come from and where does the consciousness of the dragon come from? And so I think the physical body of a dragon comes from sorcery and kind of like eugenics, basically, like selective breeding of various different monsters and reptiles and creatures, and so there's an amalgamation of like kind of evil science and alchemy and stuff that goes into creating the physical body of a dragon. But where does the consciousness come from is the question, and this is why Maiar is appealing to some people. But I have an alternate theory, and hear me out on this.
Okay.
There's a section in Morgoth's Ring, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it talks about how the disembodied spirits of elves, some elves have they refuse to go to Mandos, to the halls of Mandos. So they're basically ghosts, essentially. Like he doesn't say that, but they're essentially like, spirits who have unresolved business in Middle Earth and don't go back to Mandos. And it talks about how necromancy is the practice of using and binding those spirits to other things. And people cite this passage, on Reddit and places like that, where people discuss Tolkien and trivia and like nerdy lore stuff. And people talk about how, like the sentient, like inanimate objects, like Gurthang, which is the sword that kills Glaurung, is able to talk, stuff like that. Maybe that's what's going on there. Or maybe something similar like that is going on with the Barrow-wights. That's a form of necromancy. And so these disembodied spirits of elves who refuse to return to Mandos are out there in the world, and they can be manipulated, which is a really interesting part of lore, which not many people talk about that often. But maybe that's something that's going on with what Morgoth was doing with the dragons.
Well, if he wanted them to have intelligence, but he wanted them to be feisty. I mean, what's more feisty than an elf that's like, nope, not doing that. I'm doing my own thing. But to a point, you're now not, of a physical form. You can't quite do anything. And, had you gone back to wherever, would your life be more, are you bitter? Doesn't really, not sure. But I think part of it has to be Morgoth's evil. And fusing all these things together, there's a part of him in there. Maybe this evil possession of imbuing a spirit into an object, and then the sentience of the whatever it was that he used to create the dragon, all fused together to, create this. And it seems that each dragon of the order of a Glaurung or a Smaug, or they each have their own. I don't know if it's dissatisfaction is the word I want to use, but they seem to be why they keep grabbing things. They're searching for something. So they want something and they latch onto, okay, shiny things. I need to have this, and maybe this will make me feel, whole. They're sleeping on this thing. Like somehow this is their little blankie, their little, binky, very expensive binky. But that is this dissatisfaction that was Morgoth's that came in. This is satisfaction if we pull the thread of there's this infused spirit that's now, oh, you didn't want to go home? Oh, I got some place to put you. Let's stick you in here and see how you're happy with it. And then some element of the actual animal itself. That's an interesting thought.
Somebody else in the chat was talking about, I think it was Canadian Fantasy Corner, was talking about the dwarves as well. And this is something I've brought up with you in the past, I think. I remember we talked about this before. My theory is corrupted dwarves mixed with eagles. And so I don't know what that would actually look like a creature that's like a cross between a dwarf and an eagle. That's just a weird thought, isn't it? But and then there has to be some reptile that's going in there somewhere as well. I mean, a lot of people talk about the eagles with relation to dragons, and that's because they fly. And we talk about different creatures being a mockery of something that's one of Eru's creations. So the trolls are a mockery of the Ents, and the orcs are a mockery of the elves, and so on. And so everything has this kind of like evil, like, I don't know, cognate. It's like an evil equivalent version. But that's a bit of an overly simplistic way to think of it sometimes. But I don't know. Maybe there's some eagle that went into making them be able to fly.
But not all flew.
No, exactly. This is what I was about to say. So, I mean, they couldn't have been there in the beginning because Glaurung didn't fly. The dragons they attacked, Gondolin didn't fly. And if Morgoth had an air force at that point, then he would have found Gondolin much earlier.
just a bit. And then not quite a Tolkien argument, but then it's like, are they dragons? Are they wyverns? Are they wyverns? Are they dragons? And is it 4 legs with wings, or is it the true wyvern where the front legs are the wings with the little wingtips, and the way, walking on that, which I think is a better look for a flying dragon, to have the back legs, but the front be incorporated in with the wings. But yeah, the first 2 were non-flyers, but still wreaked havoc with no flying. So I don't know. It's interesting.
But the dwarves thing is interesting in light of like the sources that Tolkien was drawing from with dragons, I think. And this is where I think I've said this to you before. I think we did a stream on Nessie's channel about dragons like a long time ago. And I think we talked about it then, maybe. There's a connection with the legend of Sigurd and Fafnir. And so that was a big part of how Tolkien was inspired and where his type of dragon comes from. That, and also the dragon in Beowulf as well, especially with Smaug, which is well known. But there's a section of the first version of the Turin Turambar story that I was reading just the other day, just coincidentally, because I'm reading Book of Lost Tales again at the moment. So I've got a little a citation here. This is from the notes at the end of Turambar and the Foeloke, which is like the first version that Tolkien wrote in 1919. And Christopher Tolkien says, of great interest is the passage in which the nature of the dragons of Melko, that's Melkor, but in the first version he was Melko, which sounds like a chocolate bar. But the nature of the dragons of Melko is defined. Their evil wisdom, their love of lies and gold, which they may not use or enjoy, and the knowledge of tongues that men say would come from eating a dragon's heart, with evident reference to the legend in the Norse Edda of Sigurd Fafnir's bane, which was enabled to understand to his great profit the speech of birds when he ate the heart of the dragon Fafnir, roasting it on a spit. And so that is mentioned in like the early version of Glaurung, who at that time was called Glorund. So that's intriguing, and the connection there is self-evident if you know the Edda. And so I won't tell the whole story of the Norse Edda, but the dragon in that tale that's referencing, Fafnir, was originally a dwarf. He was one of 3 brothers, and
okay.
So in that, and the Loki is involved, and there's a magic ring actually, and there's some treasure, and that's where the fascination with treasure that dragons have kind of comes from mythologically, from Tolkien's kind of inspiration. And so the question of the dwarves, I think, is interesting because that was a shape-shifting creature. It was a dwarf that shapeshifted into a dragon in that tale. Which makes you wonder whether dwarves were maybe involved in some fashion with the creation of dragons, whether they were, because they have a long history in Middle Earth as well, with dwarves and dragons bumping up against each other, with Azaghal and Glaurung, and obviously Smaug and the Cold Drakes of the North in the Third Age, and there's a long association throughout Middle Earth history.
Guilty Undertaker made a statement, thematically at least, Smaug is a dark mirror of the dwarves. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because there is an interesting, just this hate or not tolerate. This is not love, because they don't love each other at all. But it's interesting that, which is why I kind of went back to the Balrog. I'm wondering if there's some sort of a connection there from the fire aspect. But the dwarves tended to piss off dragons because there was something about the earth, the deep earth, I guess, as you're getting closer to the heart of, the center of an earth, it's where you're getting to magma and fire and flame, that the dwarves just warped the inside of earth and create these great dwarven halls and all this beautiful way they were able to hew stone and, again, create things. And dragons don't really make things. They take things. And Melkor couldn't really create things. He could work things, but he couldn't do what Eru did from nothing and create. But he took things that existed and then tried to amalgamize them and in his, evil R&D factory floor, creating things. But I definitely think there's something there with the dwarves and the dragons and their constant battling, because under the ground, above the ground, whatever, overground, if a dragon saw something that had dwarves written on it, they were like, oh, yeah, I'm going to pick a fight there because I can. And that would be interesting if there's somehow dwarves, which shouldn't have been created. If you go back into the lore, dwarves weren't supposed to be created, but dwarves were created. And then when they woke up, it was like, you need to kill them. But no, they're awake. Leave them alone. They're fine. But then dwarves were jealous of men who were the chosen. Men were jealous of elves who were the chosen. And it's like everybody was looking at what everybody else had and was having a problem. And maybe in its own way, when dragons were created, they looked at dwarves as their nearest kin because they were living where dragons tend to live, in caves, underground, in the dark. And was like, I was over here minding my business, then you came. But what came first, dwarves or dragons?
Well, the dwarves were created by Aule first,
right?
But then they were put to sleep for a long time,
right?
I don't know if we have a date for when they actually did wake up, but they're ancient, but they just woke up after the elves. So yeah, I think it is. Where was the comment that Guilty Undertaker made? Thematically, at least, Smaug dark mirror of the dwarves, and I think that's right. I think it is thematic, like explicitly thematic, but it's not. it's my little tinfoil theory that maybe like dwarves were involved actually in the creation of the dragons, like there was a deliberate plan that had something to do with the dwarves, because the dwarvish early history is like not known to us. We don't know anything about it really.
Correct.
We know a little bit, but we don't really know too much about what the dwarves were doing in the first age. We just know from the elves' perspective.
What if I'll see your tinfoil and I'll raise you a little tin shrug here. What if the dwarves, in knowing that they were of the earth and they wanted to be out of the view of, because again of how they came and went and then were awakened again, what if somehow Melkor told them, hey, what if I could make you something that would help you, move this earth out of the way and, work this to start those fires? Because how did the dwarves harness the fire that they needed for the forges? That had to come from somewhere of, we need to be able to do this, because I can't just see a bunch of dwarves with a pack of matches and some charcoal briquettes going, yeah, I think we ought to be able to make something out of this. The fires that they're dealing with are near to dragon fire and strength. They're not hot enough to burn a dragon, as was evidenced by them trying to, killing Smaug in the under the mountain, and it didn't work. But wouldn't it be interesting if there was some sort of a motivation for dwarves, and they were whispered in the ear by Melkor, and it got away from them, as all things bad ideas do. Yeah, this could work. Yeah, it's thought nobody ever. And then now they're out, because I think it was Gandalf was making the comment about nameless things, other things. And one of those things is Ungoliant, I don't know how it's pronounced, was a Maiar.
Christopher Tolkien pronounced it like Ungoliant. He really stressed the last syllable. And there's you can get recordings of like some of the chapters of the Silmarillion read by Christopher Tolkien, and
oh, cool.
It's really strange the way he pronounced it, Ungoliant. Like, I think it's probably because Quenya would have had like the E at the end with the whatever it's called, the two dots. I don't know, I'm not a linguist.
Yeah.
And so you'd stress the syllable before that.
The umlaut?
Yeah, I think maybe. Yeah. Not sure. But anyway, yeah, so that's how you pronounce that. Sorry, I interrupted you there talking about the nameless things. Go on.
No, but I'm just wondering, because I found a reference in which about this generation of where they came from, and about Gandalf making a comment about the nameless things, that Melkor was a shapeshifter. Mm-hmm. And that one of the shapes he shifted into was a large snake, a serpent, a reptile. So if that being the case, maybe there was a piece of that got put in there, and that informed, hey, I'm very and again, that goes back to biblical, which he was really not trying to do, but that goes back to Genesis, the serpent being cast as this evil influencing feature that basically kicked Adam and Eve out of caused them to be kicked out of the garden, because why did you eat that apple? You told not to eat the apple. The thing is telling you to eat the apple. Why are you doing that? And he convinced them to do things that got them kicked out. So what if he used this shape-shifting capability, and that one of those shapes basically was used to create that? But I do like the dwarf aspect, though. I'm kind of loving that, which would inform the dragons always running back to ground where there's a dwarf. So you didn't treat me well, so now every time I see you, I'm going to basically, come after you and get you out of there. Oops, sorry. There goes my phone off. That was rude. Very loud. But yeah, I'm just thinking, oh, you got a super chat.
Oh, did I? I must have missed that.
I think it just popped up.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, that's I'm not sure what currency that is. 50 NOK. Morgoth created the dragons, but what is the connection between Sauron and the dragons? Are Sauron and dragons allies in some ways? So not that we know of. There's no I mean, they could have even been potentially rivals. You know, in some alternate future, in alternate history of Middle Earth, like Smaug could have been Sauron's rival in a way. We don't know. Gandalf was very worried about Smaug and Sauron forming an alliance, and that was why he created the party of Thorin. That was said in Norwegian Kroner. I think you're right, Blixie. Yeah. I should know that. I've been to Norway.
But that would be interesting because Sauron was and correct me if I get this wrong, he was sort of like the understudy or valet of Melkor. He watched Melkor go through all kinds of crazy and get banished. And then Sauron was like, okay, maybe I need to not go quite that route. But would it be interesting to find out that during the creation period, as Melkor was trying to find those things that would love him, because he was trying to one up or best Eru, and Eru's creations loved him, you know, and maybe in his creating and, you know, Melkor being Melkor, let me pit you against one another. So here are these beautiful beasts that he's created that are, you know, these war machines. And then there's Sauron going, okay, but I'm cool. Yeah, but I can take these to battle. And they're going, haha, he can ride us, or we can do this and we can breathe fire. What can you do? It would be interesting then in the next coming, now there's Smaug, now there's Sauron. Would Sauron have to not humble himself, but swallow that pride and, all right, you know what, maybe I need to take a page out of Dad's book and go get me a dragon. But a dragon's memory is very long, and I have a feeling that if there was any bad blood, it got passed down to, don't trust this, don't trust that, don't trust. I just don't see dragons partnering up unless it's in their benefit. Glaurung just was demented, and he was like, oh, I get to cause mayhem? Sure, I'll do this with you. Why not? Smaug was more, I'm about Smaug things. I'm about doing Smaugly advancements.
Which is why I think Sauron would have found it quite easy to manipulate Smaug. You know, he would be able to offer him things. He would be, you know what Smaug wants. He wants treasure, and he wants to sit on it. And so Sauron could give him that. There's definitely, I think, a possibility that they could have had an alliance, and I think Gandalf was wise to be worried about that, of course. So yeah, there's not a strong connection between the two. The only other thing I would say about Sauron and dragons as well is Sauron was kind of associated with the manipulation of spirits as well. So there's a section where we're first introduced to the Tower Nu Fuin, which is like the forest under Nightshade in the Silmarillion, and Sauron is described as being the Lord of Werewolves and all this other stuff, and it says he manipulated spirits and phantoms or something like this. I don't remember the exact quote, so I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but he did have this ability to manipulate spirits, and obviously that's what he does later on with the Rings of Power. So I mean, I always like to think that Sauron was Morgoth's like sub-creator, evil sub-creator in chief. Like he's chief scientist, like scientist / sorcerer who came up with some of these different schemes, and that they worked together and collaborated on things like the dragons and the machines of war that they created for the wars of Beleriand. But we don't have direct evidence of that. But I think we should probably move on to another Patreon question before too long. Did you have anything else to say about Sauron?
Allison Kurtzberg, I'm sorry if I'm murdering your name, made an interesting comment that Sauron did make the flying Nazgul beasts. Maybe he was taking his first steps towards dragons.
Possibly, yeah. Maybe he was trying to make his own dragon. Yeah, it's possible. Or maybe they were, you know, a kind of bastard offshoot of dragons in a way, like a kind of like a related species.
Can't breathe fire, but they can fly, but they're smaller.
Well, they're scaly and have leathery wings, and certainly similar to dragons, you know, overall, like small flying cold drakes in a way, aren't they? Kind of also a cross between that and like a pterodactyl. So they could be similar. But yeah, good question. But yeah, I'm going to get to the next Patreon question, which is from Alison. Actually, it's from A.N. Kreutzberg.
That's it.
And this is similar to the first one, actually, and maybe I should have asked these together. But she says, since Morgoth often corrupts existing creatures to serve them, do you think the dragons could be a corrupted creature? Any thoughts as to what? I thought the eagles, but then the first dragon didn't fly. So yeah, I think we've kind of covered this to a large extent as well. Did you have any other thoughts about any other like things that could have gone in that pot? Because
No, I think because we were looking at could Balrogs have been a part? Could dwarves? I like the dwarf theory. I'm really liking that one because there definitely seems to be that relationship between Melkor dwarves and then the dragon and dwarves, and it just continued on through there. But I don't know. Yeah, some sort of strange. I think the Sauron aspect of his shape shifting, maybe that inspired it. I don't know.
yeah.
And maybe that's why Sauron was a little jealous of the dragons, because here was his great shape-shifting trick and it got taken and put into this other thing. But now I'm not unique anymore. No, it's interesting.
She has another question as well, so we'll move straight on to that one. She asks, what is dragon sickness? Is it caused by dragon treasure, or is it caused, it should say, by treasure accumulation itself, which then draws a dragon to it? So my answer to this is yes.
Yes. I think because most
It's
of this
both.
treasure, because this treasure is somewhere deep and dark, it's almost like treasure bends. You're so dark and you're so deep and you're so with this stuff and you're breathing it and everything else. It's like when you're diving and you come up too fast, it's like the bends. It's directly related to, because something about all that treasure corrupts the mind. You start getting super paranoid and easily manipulated and vulnerable, which is what happened to Thorin and to others who got to. And it tended to be a dwarf thing. The dwarves tended to get maybe that was their punishment for dealing with all that treasure and not wanting to share and living in such quiet darkness, that was the manipulating of the spirit, if you will. Maybe that was the one thing that was Sauron was able to do to the dwarves, because he wasn't too fond of them either. Maybe that was a direct result of that. And the more you crave the treasure, the worse it got. But I definitely think it's a physical thing, but I think it's also I don't want to call it character, but kind of going in that direction.
Yeah, this is also related to the Fafnir myth again as well, because the treasure hoard in that story was cursed as well. I'm trying to remember the exact story, but it's been a long time since I've read it. But yeah, that was kind of an idea that came from that. It was an illusion that was made there.
So would then any dwarf or gold hoard or treasure hoard be cursed, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, dragons are attracted to gold, and accumulations of gold attract dragons. They draw them in, and then so they spend a lot of time in the presence of this gold and this dragon hoard, and their kind of evil spirit seeps into the gold. And there's a vicious cycle that happens, and others are drawn there, and they usually probably get eaten. And so it's like this kind of like, I think there was a comment here that was made. It was it's Canadian Fantasy Corner again is saying it is the dragon's metaphysical essence being poured into the treasure over time. So it's like a curse that kind of seeps in, and it becomes the malice of the dragon kind of infects the gold. It kind of taints it.
Indeed. And then Albert Russell says, I believe that when the dwarves were given the rings of power, it made them, very greedy. I think it was like wonder power to activate. Yeah, those rings just brought it all out.
Yeah, the rings of power had different effects on the dwarves than on anybody else, and it affected them in unexpected ways. I think Sauron was, hoping for something more along the lines of what he did achieve with men, but it didn't quite work out. But it did make them greedy and more dwarfish. It brought out the worst aspects of their kind of culture in the people that bore the rings, the Dwarven kings. But yeah, so that's basically kind of what's going on there with the dragon sickness. It's kind of like a curse. It's kind of like an unconscious effect of the dragon's prolonged presence, and it's a side effect of their evil spirit, and possibly part of their design as well. Potentially, I think also there's a connection there with Morgoth as well. If you think about Morgoth, what did he do? He stole the Silmarils. He took them away with him to Middle Earth. He promised them to Ungoliant, and then the Balrogs like chased her off, and then what did he do with them? He took them with him down into Angband and kept them in the darkness and hoarded them and jealously guarded them just like a dragon. So I think it's that little spark of evil spirit that comes from Morgoth as well, which is the essence of what's going on with the dragons and their
that covetousness of those Silmarils, in that, because he was so jealous of Fëanor. I mean, the Silmarils were never ever seen again because there was a part of Fëanor that went into those jewels, and then Morgoth was just determined to have them. And yeah, I think you're right. That could be another aspect of him that got infused. But I also like the concept of, just dragons just laying over top of it and just putting their little dragon essence. Let me just rub my little dragon stuff in here. And then the funk is so deep down that it doesn't dissipate. Yeah. So then you go down there and breathe it and it just starts affecting you. But I think disproportionately dwarves.
Sauron does that thing where he sort of releases clouds of toxic fumes, doesn't he? Which maybe like there's like a slow effect that happens over time where like dragons kind of physically perspire their evil essence or something.
And it just filters through wherever they are. And in a hoard like that, where there's no air to move it, if there's no air to move it, it's like it's just going to concentrate.
What is that ringtone? It sounds like Formula One or something.
No, I have an Android, and when I first had a phone, it was a Motorola, and I loved all of the ringtones associated with it. And the reason why I have that particular tone is one time someone tried to take my phone, and I had someone call it, and of course my phone did that, and no one else's ringtone sounds like it. And I was like, "Hi, my phone's in here. Just put it down. I don't need to know. I'll find it." And sure enough, we found my phone. And they were like, "That's smart. I have a ringtone that, if anything, you think it's a little transformer, like my phone's going to turn into something, an Autobot or something, or a Decepticon." So that's why I like it.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes
Sorry
sense.
about that. Trying to mute it.
If Smaug had a phone, it would probably have a similar.
It would true. It would sound like that.
Okay, next question here from actually I think this is so this is the last set of questions from another patron. These next set are all from Cloaked One, and he says his first question is: we know what a fire drake is, but what exactly is a cold drake? It's mentioned in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings as the thing responsible for the death of Dain the First, who I mentioned at the beginning, and his son, but no specifics are given. Curious to hear your speculation on this. So there is, I think there's a simple answer to this. A cold drake is a dragon that doesn't breathe fire. Yeah, that's what that is. So, like I said earlier on, I think the cold drakes are kind of like they're almost like a symptom of the diminishment of dragons over time. Their spirit just kind of like becomes less potent, and they, like everything does, everything is less intense and less powerful and less high fantasy, if you will, in the Third Age compared with the First. This is why we've got Dark Lords like Morgoth, who was way more powerful at the beginning, and then we've got elves like Fingolfin who can actually go toe to toe with him. Like, can you like Legolas having a fight with Morgoth, it would be over in like 5 seconds.
It's like
But
Lego in the movie, looking at
um,
Legolas's face in the Fellowship of the Ring when he sees the Balrog, and he's like, "Oh nope, all the nopes, nope, gotta go, nope, nope." And then when they went into the forest of Lothlorien, and they were like, "Yeah, he was taken by a Balrog of fire and smoke and flame," and everyone's faces were like, "All the nopes, represent, Gandalf, love you, but yeah, you're gonna stay down there with that because we're not in a piece of that are we having." So yeah, I think so. I think it's just the devolution as the lessening of as each one would happen. And same with the elves, some of their strengths or their abilities lessened, and eventually it was like, okay, it's time to go, we got to leave, because
it's more or less universal across the board. You see the diminishment of peoples, and you have the spiders. We've got Ungoliant at the beginning, who's this huge monster who nearly fought Morgoth to a standstill and nearly killed him. And then later on we've got her children, and then there's just one left, and then we've got like the babies of her up there in Mirkwood, but they're like way less powerful than Ungoliant it was.
But Ungoliant got together with spiders. Ungoliant couldn't make Ungoliant light. She decided to branch out and got together with spiders, and
she interbred with other lesser spiders when she got back to Middle Earth, and that's where those came from. But still, things got less powerful.
So
the
what
dwarves,
would a dragon get with to have less dragon less? Ooh, I'm scared of that.
Dinosaurs. So, who knows? Yeah, I'm not sure, but so that's what was going on there. I think with the cold drakes is that they interbred with lesser creatures and became lesser over time, just like everything else. And that's the answer to your question, is that they just couldn't breathe fire. So we're almost we've gone just over an hour now, so I'm going to do a quick mid-roll and just talk about what's coming up on the channel. I announced it on the channel recently on a community post, but for those of you who didn't see it, I'm going to, after the current chapter is finished of the Silmarillion Explained series, I'm going to be putting that series on a little bit of a hiatus, because I'm a little bit fatigued from from working through this book for so long. It's been 2 years and I'm still working on it. So I don't know how long for, but potentially for a month or two at least. I'm not going to work on any Silmarillion videos. This week, the final part of chapter 18 will be out, which will be the kind of everything after the Fall of Fingolfin, which I covered last week or the week before now. And so that was that. And so now I'm going to be covering this week. Later on this week, I'll have a video out on Húrin and Huor and their first visit to Gondolin. So when they get saved by the eagles, and then they spend a year living with Turgon, and it'll feature the return of voice acting, which my father will be voicing Húrin in that video, which is kind of fun. I'm looking forward to people hearing that. He came here to the office and recorded in person, which is the first time I've had a live in-person recording. I was like directing him and teaching him how to pronounce Elvish.
Nice! That's awesome!
He kept messing up the Elvish, bless him, and getting really annoyed with himself. But he's like kind of into amateur acting, like his kind of like his hobby. So he was pleased to do it. And he was the one that first read The Hobbit to me when I was a kid, so it's kind of fun.
Oh, yay.
So that'll be coming out hopefully this week. Definitely be the end of the week, because it's going to be a really long video again. It's going to be like a half-an-hour video. And then at some point in the future, I'll get back to it and I'll get to Beren and Luthien. And I'm writing a video right now about the One Ring. So I've just actually just started that today in some spare hours I had this afternoon. And I'm writing a video on examining the question of the possible sentience of the One Ring, which is kind of like an open question, and it's an interesting one. So there's going to be a little bit of a video essay out some point in the next week after this. So
absolutely. Thinking
week after.
thinking jewelry. Yeah, it was evil thinking jewelry. Yes, it was.
Yeah, it depends how you define sentience is my starting point, and that's a question in itself. But yeah, that's going to be a fun, interesting thing to talk about. I just noticed I've had a super chat here, so I better get to that before it disappears. And in film 3, Mordor orcs are portrayed as a disciplined force with upright posture and skeletal faces. What aspects are true and not true from the book? I think orcs varied a lot, a great deal. They are generally described as having either black or yellow skin, which I think most of the orcs in the films did. So that seemed right. There are certainly fangs and claws. I think the one aspect of the films that was maybe not quite how I imagined them anyway was the accents. The accents seemed a little bit hackneyed to me, and so
the Uruks worked for me.
Yes,
the Uruks work. I think if they had maybe done a little closer to the Uruks, it would have worked. But maybe they wanted to make them less beastie, so you would be able to hear the differences between the different groups. But I think definitely the orcs in the movie were kind of what I pictured in my mind. I don't know if I think there's the difference between the orcs and the goblins. Are they the same thing? Are they different things? That maybe are goblins if they're just mostly living underground and they never come up as they were under Moria, or was it? I'm sorry, Goblin Town when they went through there and got caught and after they left Rivendell in The Hobbit, or were they really more like they were in the Fellowship? The Lord of the Rings, where it seemed like they were more. They had skin and hair and claws, and whereas the goblins seemed kind of pasty and sticky and clammy looking, kind of a thing. Maybe it's just based on where they were. Are they the same? Are they different? But I think he got that. I think the movie did a pretty good job with it, but I think because of the manipulating of the being, you got all kinds of mutations, so they could look generally the same, but wildly different.
Yeah, I think I quite liked how they kind of had a distinctive sense of the different subcultures of orcs. Like the Misty Mountains orcs looked different to the Uruks. In the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, I don't remember which one, might be Appendix B. It's mentioned that the orcs of Mordor, the kind of foot soldiers, were called Snaga, which is slaves. But then there was Uruks in Mordor as well, and we kind of see that in the films. Like you can see that there's like the bigger, beefier orcs, and then there's like the kind of like the kind of cannon fodder orcs,
right,
within Mordor. And then there's Sauron's orcs, who are very, very regimented and very kind of like soldierly kind of orcs who seem to have a lot of a sense of discipline about them, and I do think that was probably well imagined. So I actually really like the way that they depicted the orcs in the Lord of the Rings films, not in the Hobbit films, just to be clear. The Hobbit film screwed up when it came to orcs, sadly. Got all goblins.
the
I
goblins,
think orcs and goblins are the same thing for me. Like it's just a synonym for me. But yeah. So thank you for the super chat as well. I'm much appreciated, and thank you for watching. Before we tackled that one, I was trying to talk mid-roll stuff. Carole, did you have anything that you wanted to plug or promote or talk about in a minute or two? You mentioned some other channels that you work with sometimes.
Yeah, I'm actually doing a lot of work with the Disenfranchised. It's a Discord channel. They're actually kind of cool, very pithy, snarky group that are going through a lot of the content that's out here as far as Marvel and Star Wars and everything, and kind of trying to find a more where the differences, where the consistencies, all of this is like everybody's excited for Obi-Wan because I think we're finally going to get some aspects right. So I'm participating with them. I am actually going to Comic-Con in July. I'm really excited about that. And there's going to be quite a few folks there.
Is that, which one are you going to? New York or
No,
somewhere
I'm
else?
going to San Diego. So to the big
Oh,
one.
the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, to the big one. I had tickets to go in July, but of course it got canceled in 2020, 2021. They did MiniCon. They tried it in the fall for folks that were in the San Diego area. But they're like, you know what? We're going to, with what's left, we're going to try it. And it's funny, just the ramping up to it. Just, okay, let me get my walking shoes. Let me get my backpack with my trail mix. And let me bring because everyone's already talking about, yeah, you haven't been to Comic-Con unless you slept outside Hall H. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how I feel about that, but sure, I might, peek my head in. And then, of course, Smokescreen, he's written a book, Crimson Gods. So we're trying to promote that. And then we're getting ready for the Dance of the Dragons, or whatever they're calling it, that's coming up in August. The live streams and the channel will kick back up for that. So those are the various and sundry things. I am still working on my own channel that has nothing to do with fantasy. It's all to do with the trip that I'm about to take, and just not rehashing content, but here's the gaps. Here's the things that, oh yeah, this is great, but let's talk about getting from here to here when you're traveling, that you might not know, that it'll be good to know. And if you need to know more about this, there's plenty of content. Watch that. This is more, along the lines.
So this is like a travel block with your own kind of.
Well, it's travel is going to be a part of it. It's going to start there, but it's like any kind of tip or trick that has to do with, like, it's going to be travel for this, but it's also getting prepared for travel. Here are things that you need to do that will make life easier when you're getting ready to go someplace, because it's a lot different than what it was before COVID, and just trying to fill in those gaps, because people jumping out there thinking, oh, hey, I'm going to go travel again. It's a bit the Wild Wild West out here. And I've just been educated about quite a few things, testing all of my travel skills. I used to be on the road 42 to 47 weeks a year for years. And this is a little different. So I just decided, you know what, I have too much knowledge. I think I'm going to try a little Instagram thing and see if that works. And if it does, I might move it over to YouTube, but that's getting closer to being a thing. So I'll keep you posted. Watch the space.
Yeah, definitely let me know. I'll be interested to check that out. I'm going to have to try and maybe talk you into reporting on potential Lord of the Rings stuff going on at San Diego Comic-Con for me, if you're going to be there.
Hey, because I'm going on a hunt, because it's close. They've been talking about, the series, and it's coming and it's closer.
The timing seems right for a second trailer at San Diego Comic-Con, I think.
Yes, that there's got to be an advance. I'm thinking anything that's like it bubbling in the surface there, and I'm thinking there's got to be some, because they released that one trailer and everyone lost their minds. So I'm like, oh yeah.
Some in good ways, some in not so good ways.
Indeed. So my whole thing is, I know there's got to be something, because it's just too fortuitous not to take advantage of it. So everyone else is doing Star Wars stuff. I'll be over here looking for Lord of the Rings stuff. And like, what are you doing? Yeah, y'all are all over there. I'm over here where no one is, or there'll be a few diehards of us. So if I find anything, I will let you know.
They haven't announced anything, and I haven't heard anything. But it just seems like
to believe that they're going to do something at Comic-Con, because it's the perfect place to do it.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah,
I'm just thinking. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking.
Yeah, if you find it, bring your camera, and if you can report on it for me, I'll edit together a little video with you reporting on anything that might happen there. We'll do that.
I definitely deal. Absolutely deal.
Perfect. Okay.
What are you up to? As far as after all of the hiatuses and things, what's next? For the latter part of your year.
Obviously I'll be covering the Rings of Power when it comes out, so I will be doing episode reviews. I am working on my setup here in the office, so I've got, people can't see, but I've got a lot of floor space here in the office, and I'm going to be setting up like one corner of the room to do like kind of like blog style videos for my episode reviews of that, which I think will be easier to do and chop together and just record and get them out quicker that way. So yeah, working on that. I'll still be working on lore content, going back to the Numenor series soon as well. So I have another series on the channel where I talk about the history of Numenor, and I kind of got to a point last year at some point, and I realized that nobody was really watching any of the videos that I was doing compared with some of the other stuff I was doing. So I kind of left it be, but with the show coming up, I do want to get back to that. So I'll be doing that. And I also I got sent copies of the PDFs of Free League Publishing's The One Ring RPG, which is the tabletop RPG. It's the second edition, which they did I think a record breaking for a tabletop RPG Kickstarter for. And that came out earlier this year. So I've now run a game. I put this on Instagram, but if you don't follow me on Instagram, you wouldn't have seen it. So it's the first time I've talked about this on the channel. But I will be running a game of that as a podcast on the channel, and so I think what I'm going to do with it is make it premium content, though. So I might make it just I'm going to open up channel membership, and so the first couple of episodes will be for everybody, and then I'll maybe make it premium. Just we'll see how it goes.
Yep,
if people like it. I haven't decided yet, but I want to do that. So I will be doing that, and it's fun. I really enjoyed playing the first couple of adventures with me IRL friends. I had them all here in the office, piled around a little table, and we all played the game together. So yeah, that'll be good. So yeah, that's what's coming up for the channel in the next months. But yeah, that's all for now, really. We should get back to Patreon questions, I think.
Cool.
All right. So we've got 2 left, and they're both from Cloaked One again. And so this next question here is about the intelligence of dragons, which we've already talked about quite a bit, but it's a slightly different question. Cloaked One asks, were all dragons as intelligent, for want of a better word, as Glaurung and Smaug? Could they all speak, for instance? It's an interesting question. I never really considered that any Tolkienian dragons couldn't speak. I always assumed that they all could.
Same.
But we don't know, really, necessarily. You speculated earlier that the fell beasts, as they're kind of called, that's not their name, but it's the closest thing we've got to a name for the beasts that the dragons that the Nazgul ride, could be related to the dragons, or could be a type of dragon even, and they don't seem to be able to communicate. So maybe so yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts?
I would, if I'm going to just assume, because I never thought about it. I same as you. I always thought they all spoke as a aspect of their dragonness because of how they were all interrelated. So my thought would be that they would all speak. I think, however, those that were more reluctant to intermix freely probably chose not to speak. I'm trying to remember. I believe they might be telepathic to some degree, or they were just, putting forth their uneasement to they could touch emotions to make you feel, losing all hope and whatever, and feeling, forlorn. And, Bilbo was trying to not get overwhelmed by a Smaug because their stare, because they could, enrapture and get you, what is the word?
Well, they hypnotize you essentially.
Yeah, we hypnotize you. Thank you.
The simile that the Children of Húrin uses is that Turin became as if one turned to stone. So it's like they're almost like petrifying you, and paralyzing you and holding you in place.
So
at least Glaurung had that power.
Yeah, Glaurung did, and with Smaug, it was more his words. He almost had that same as Sauron, that ability to just whisper things, and then all of a sudden you were just, I don't know, and maybe, and this is this and that and the other. And then if you add all that on top of the dragon sickness, if you were there breathing their air, it just fed into it and just became this self-fulfilling, infection or illness that you had. But I would say that I would think that they would all have spoken. Would they have chosen to speak would then be, I don't know.
Well, the ones that we do meet up and personal are up close and personal are rather verbose, aren't they? Both of them.
Quite a bit, because they want to posture.
It's hard for me to imagine like a mute dragon, because Smaug is chatty and Glaurung loves the sound of his own voice.
But yes, he does, and he just sits there and pontificates as he's wrecking shop. But yeah, I can't imagine any of them not. That's just my thought on it. But their sentience, yes, highly intelligent, but susceptible because of that.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've covered that one pretty well, so we'll move on to the very last question here. And this is my favorite one, and I think this is your favorite as well, you said to me before we started. Cloaked One, again, asks, where did the best dragon, the green dragon, get its name from? So my first thoughts on this are, it's an interesting question, actually, because it means that the hobbits had to have at some point had myths or folk tales about dragons, which means they must have known about dragons at some point in their history, in their migrations from the east into Eriador. So at some point they came across dragons, and we know that they lived at one point in the Vales of the Anduin. There, we know that from the story of Smeagol, which is not too far from where we've got the Aothead and the dwarves and all those stories about dragons. So what it tells us is, it tells us something about hobbits, that they did have stories about dragons, and at some point they must have encountered them, you would expect.
And maybe they did, and they decided, let's not live here.
Yeah, exactly.
Let us move someplace else, as opposed to the men, of Dale and whatnot. Okay, let's just move in the middle of a lake at the base of a mountain with a dragon in it that just burnt everything up. The hobbits were like, look at the time, gotta go. We need to move on away from here. So again, of hobbits, I like them.
So yeah, it's interesting because it tells us something about hobbits. The hobbits in the first couple of chapters of the Lord of the Rings, which is our kind of, there are eyes and ears in the Lord of the Rings. They're our protagonists, so they're the ones that we see the story from their perspective of, and so we get more of an idea about Hobbit culture and their kind of ways and beliefs and so on than we do of any other culture that we encounter in a more personal way. It's explained in more depth by the narrator than any of the other peoples that we meet necessarily, on the whole. And so there's this dynamic that happens in the early chapters where we get the conversations between Gaffer Gamgee and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but his fellow old geezer in the pub. I'm drawing a blank. I can't get the name out. But they have that conversation, and then we get the conversation between Sam and his son, the other guy's son. And I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the name, but we get that kind of like debate that happens between Sam and the other guy in the pub, and they're talking about, Sam's talking about the elves and how he believes in elves, and how he saw a walking tree, or his cousin or something saw a talking tree up in the north, and we get this sense anyway of the hobbits having become very over time having become very excuse me. Get a dry mouth. Over time, they have become very resistant to the mythological, and they've become very Sandyman. Thank you, Guilty Undertaker. Yeah, Ted Sandyman is the son that Sam is talking to, and then he's the miller. The father is the miller, and so they have this debate, and it's kind of ironic that they're sitting in a pub called the Green Dragon about whether mythological creatures are real, and it's like, did you not think about where that name came from, and why you have these stories about these different creatures and things? It's because they're all real.
And I think, like you said, from before when the Smeagol and Deagle, from their ancestors, if you will, were in and amongst all of that. somehow all of that oral history traveled with them. I still firmly believe the reason why they ended up in the Shire is they were like, yeah, not trying to get eaten, time to go. And ended up in the Shire in this beautiful green, meadowland. And those stories became, tales for kids, but even, maybe the history of the telling of the beginnings of the different branches of the hobbits. Again, we don't want to travel, we don't want any adventures, we don't want to draw any attention to us. Maybe they, in a way, they have that. If you have gold, it draws attention of dragons. So maybe they're like, we're living the most simple life as possible. Again, me speculating, so that we don't have anything crazy coming over here bothering us. And the name of the dragon is fanciful, prancing pony, Bree. They don't even really go to Bree. There are some hobbits there. They're known there, but most hobbits are like, yeah, we're just going to stay over here where it's quiet, it's peaceful. We're going to garden, have something good to eat, celebrate birthdays, and just generally be a wonderful group of people. But yeah, I think there's a reminiscence of their ancestry from, I believe that what caused them to migrate there is just to get away from the crazy, but they still kept the stories of those fantasy creatures, because they've even said we've seen things in the woods passing through. So they're aware that there are things in the world. They just don't want to be in the center of it, near it. Don't move here. Keep moving. No. Go on. Yeah, walk through that way. Go ahead. But
yeah, at one point in that conversation, Sam says the elves are going west and sailing over the sea, and Sandyman says to him, well, that's nothing new. They've been doing that forever. And it's a fair point. They have been. So I suppose, yeah, in a way, the hobbits, many of them, the kind of orthodox hobbits, which Sam wasn't. He was kind of weird, or he was an outlier at least. But the regular, yeah, certainly. The Bilbo had a big effect on me. He changed a lot of Shire culture. There was a change that happened after he came back, and we see that in the first chapters of the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So, yeah, great question. And there isn't a definitive answer. Like, I can't point you towards a dragon that was green that was connected with Hobbit culture, or like the Hobbits encountered at some point in their history. There's no lore, trivia answer to the question, but it's intriguing that there is a pub called the Green Dragon there in the middle of the Shire.
Well, I did some research on this question because I liked it. I thought that's a great question. And there was a flower and a firework called a snapdragon. And for Bilbo Baggins, and Gandalf made that special dragon firework, that maybe there was that reminiscence of the dragons, and they saw this flower, and Gandalf popping through every now and again, with the displays and the spectaculars. Maybe it could be related that way, or maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to remember the colors of the dragons, because Ankalon was black, Smaug was pretty much black. Glaurung was more
golden, I think of him.
Yeah, he was more golden white. I'm trying to think if there were one that was, that might have wandered through and it was green, or I don't know. But it would be interesting if it was just a little nod to their history, but maybe to their present with the because I looked up snapdragons because I was like, oh yeah, they kind of have an interesting shape. I don't know. That was a great question. So, I definitely.
Where did you find that? I'm not familiar with that reference.
I was looking in. Hold on, let me pull it up. Of course, we don't want to cooperate.
While you're doing that, I'll talk to the chat here. Mark Sheesa saying, what about the firework dragon? I assume that means the dragon at Bilbo's party in chapter 1. And that was, Gandalf retelling the story of Bilbo's encounter with Smaug, basically.
So this is in a dragon wiki.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I was like, when in doubt, let's start there. So I looked up Green Dragon and the reference came up. So I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I've never seen it referenced anywhere else, but I thought it was an interesting tie, potentially from where they came from and where they ended up.
Dragon Wiki is just a Wikipedia site for just dragons.
I love.
It's kind of cool.
It
Yeah.
works for me.
All right, so that's the last Patreon question. So I think we'll probably draw a line under this here. We're going for just over an hour and a half. I want to thank you one more time for coming on, Carole. It's been really good to catch up with you again and talk to you about
absolutely.
dragons.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. And I'll hopefully see you next month at some point.
You have a question in the chat that says, what was Tolkien influenced by when he creating dragons, other mythologies?
Yeah, I talked about this a bit at the beginning. The legend of Fafnir, Sigurd and Fafnir. Sigurd was the dragon slayer who killed Fafnir, who was actually a dwarf originally, and he kind of polymorphed into a big old dragon. And there was some enchanted treasure that was involved, and there was a curse on the treasure. The part from the Turin-Turambar story about him hiding in a ditch and then shanking him in the belly, that comes directly from that story. So that comes from the story of Fafnir. So that's what's going on there. Also, I think in the Norse version of that story, the part about the blood seeping out into the trenches there is also related to the part about Glaurung bleeding out and that causing Turin-Turambar to go into a daze like that. So that was what was going on with that myth. That whole storyline is a mix between that and the story of Kalervo from the from Finnish mythology. So that was these two main sources with that, and Tolkien was very explicit about that. It was very fan fiction of him to write that story when he wrote that in 1919.
I love it. 1919 fanfic.
Yeah. He certainly wouldn't have used that terminology, but it's basically the term fits.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then, of course, the dragon in Beowulf. I think a lot of people probably know this, but the scene in The Hobbit where Bilbo goes in the first time round and he goes in and he steals the cup and then he escapes with the cup and he comes back and shows the dwarves and he says, look, there's a lot more, but I've got this, like, go me. And he comes out and he expects a little pat on the back for it. That is directly from Beowulf. That's a direct allusion to Beowulf because that exact scene happens in the second part of Beowulf where they with the dragon, after the bit that everybody knows with Grendel and Grendel's mother, there's a dragon. And actually, interestingly, in the Beowulf myth, there's a missing page in the manuscript. And that page is like the backstory of the thief that steals into the dragon's cave and steals the cup. So it's almost as if like Tolkien was filling in the gap in that story.
Okay.
So that's what was going on with that, and that was his a big part of his inspiration for that. The desolation of Smaug around Erebor, around the Lonely Mountain, where you get the wonderful description in The Hobbit of like the wasteland around there. That was very much straight out of Beowulf. Yeah. So those were his big inspirations for his dragons. It's all very Norse and Germanic, his dragons. There's not very much of these kind of like Eastern dragon myth that goes into Tolkien really at all. Dragons, of course, are ubiquitous in mythology. Like every culture has got a dragon myth somewhere associated with it. But that's, the type of dragon that Tolkien identified with was the dragon that featured prominently in the types of stories that he liked, which were largely Germanic and from Northern Europe. And that was his first love, really. So yeah, that's my simple answer to that one. Did you have anything to add about that question before we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. That's interesting because I read Beowulf, and when I was looking,
I know you like Beowulf. Yeah,
I love Beowulf. Yeah, I really do. I hated the movie, but I love the story. We won't go there again. But it's interesting how Tolkien's influences, pull forward into his work, and it's how other people have drawn those influences from these early works into their later works. We may never see how George ends his, but I just, anything with a dragon in it, I just enjoy it because there's just something about the beast that's just, it could be, it could exist, it could have existed. I don't see why it could not. The only piece we just trying to figure out is the flame. That's the part, the fire breathing dragon. The cold drake, yeah, you could get. Just look at a Komodo dragon going by. But a fire breathing, that would be, do I want to see one walking through DC? No. But I like volcanoes, so it's like, yeah, there's a place where they live. I would go there. But I'm nuts.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great, and thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back hopefully. I think next week I should have another guest on. I need to double check with that, but I will let you all know. If he is available, we will be talking about the Rings of Power next week, so that'll be fun. And as I said earlier on, I'll be back with the last part of chapter 18 of the Silmarillion Explained, which is the story of Húrin and Huor in Gondolin. So you can probably expect that maybe Friday, roughly. So that'll be out then. That's goodbye from me and goodbye from Carole.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
See you next time, everybody. Bye.